This is our 9th annual collaboration between the McCombs School of Business and the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas. This talk is aimed at gathering and interviewing top economists and business executives from key industry sectors that influence our Texas economy. My name is Lillian Mills. I am the interim dean of McCombs, and my field is taxation and accounting, which is a near cousin to economics. So I am highly excited to be able to interview this panel. I remind you that we let you pre-submit questions, and we chose from the most common questions. We're unable to answer live questions today. So let me start by introducing our panelists. First, we have Amir Hassan, and Amir Hassan is a serial entrepreneur, inventor, technologist, and author. He founded and is CEO of an award-winning artificial intelligence company, SparkCognition, and he's the founding CEO of SkyGrid, a Boeing and SparkCognition joint venture that's building an aerial operating system to power the next century of aviation. Keith Phillips joined the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas in January 1984. He is a prolific writer in economics, as areas of concentration are regional economics and forecasting. And for the past 16 years, Keith has been the most accurate forecaster of Texas job growth in the Western Blue Chip economic forecast. And then my colleague, Mellie Price, is an 8-time entrepreneur herself and is well known as a co-founder of the nationally recognized entrepreneurial hub Capital Factory and the corporate innovation consulting team SoftMatch. And Mellie also founded 2 healthcare startups and a global ticketing software platform, FrontGate Solutions, which was sold to Live Nation in 2015. Mellie is our current executive director of the John Brumley Texas Venture Labs, a program at the McCombs School that connects graduate student entrepreneurs with Texas-based startups. And she's a partner at the Notley Ventures, a philanthropic organization that brings entrepreneurial thinking to the nonprofit space. And I'm just so honored that these 3 are here today to talk about economics and the Texas economy in the technology space. So let's begin. We are still in a COVID pandemic, and in 2020, it sent devastating personal economic shockwaves around the world. And it's going to be a big marker about technological change. And today I want to talk about the role that technology, and in particular AI, artificial intelligence, played in developing new vaccines. That may be one of the most consequential, but we're going to explore many other impacts. And even before the pandemic, digital technology has dramatically affected our life. With new products and services, the speed of creation is so fast and customers have new power. There's little loyalty to products or providers as our business climate is changing so quickly. So today's discussion is focused on the future of technology and innovation, and we want to discuss key trends and its effect on how we do business. So we're going to begin with some questions about economic impact broadly. And Mellie, I'd like to start with you. You've been in Austin for a while and have been seeing the business landscape change and grow. And we're certainly seeing lots of new venture capital and business headquarters moving right here to Austin. Tell us more about what that means for business in Austin, Texas specifically.
Thank you, Dean Mills, and thank you for that wonderful introduction. It's a joy to watch your leadership at the university. This is a fun question for me. I've been in Austin since 1988. And I'll just say 88 was a difficult time in Austin. Unemployment was high, very little diversification in our economy. We were largely government and university employed. And, over a 30-year period, which in some ways is a long time, but in some ways is a very short time, we've just been so enormously differentiated in our business ecosystem. And that's been because of this constant drum of people moving to Austin. So the influx we've seen lately in venture is new-ish for venture, but it's not new for Austin. We've been growing at a really wonderful clip for a while. And so generally speaking, I think the trend speaks to more diversification, more job creation, and I'm really excited about that. Growth obviously does come with some pros and cons. I think what I'm excited about is Austin is at a place where it can really influence growth moving forward, as we have these wonderful venture capitalists that are moving to town, folks like Jim Breyer and Breyer Capital, Tim Draper and Associates, and 8VC. These are firms that have lots of assets under management and have done a lot to promote new company creation. And with that comes new jobs. So the only thing I'd really add to that is that, for this to be good for everyone, for all Austinites, we need to do that intelligently. And, I work heavily in the startup ecosystem, which is about new job creation and creating economic mobility. So we need multiple job types to come out of this growth. And we're seeing that with headquarters moving here. So we've got great companies coming, more jobs, more opportunity for everyone, which I will argue is definitely better than 1988, where it was hard to find a job and hard to expand for your family. So I think in general, this is all great news for Austin, and I trust our leadership will continue to strive to do it equitably.
And Mellie, do you have more you want to say about capital trends, not just in Austin, but elsewhere in Texas?
Yeah, so, the focus is on venture right now because we have great firms moving here, but venture is just one asset class, and it's one asset class even for small businesses. There's a lot of discussion now about, how do you fund early stage innovations, things that come out of universities with less dilutive capital, right? And most of the venture capitalists I know, they'll be the first to tell you that not every company is a venture company. So we're seeing trends in alternative options for startups to be able to get their idea up and running, things like, STTRs and SBIR grants and accelerator programs that are non-dilutive, revenue-based financing. There's some really exciting changes happening in how startups can grow and launch their businesses.
Thanks, Mellie. And now I want to dive into a more specific industry trend in artificial intelligence. And Amir, can you help us with that, about where your AI industry is going and what are key trends we should look for?
Well, thank you very much for having me, Dean Mills. Artificial intelligence is more than a vertical industry. It's really something that adds value across a plethora of areas. Now, a few years ago, artificial intelligence was really used mostly in a commercial context to do things like optimizing the click rate on an ad, to build better web portals and so on. But now AI is finally coming out of the box. And by that, what I mean is that the capabilities of perception, decision, and action, which are three areas that AI systems are targeted towards, those capabilities have matured to the point where AI is manifesting itself in the real world in many, many interesting ways. When we started SparkCognition, the goal and the desire was to build a world that was smarter, and to do so not by deconstructing and reconstructing the world, but rather to layer on an intelligent fabric around the infrastructure, the pumps, the turbines, the oil rigs, the solar plants, all of the physical infrastructure that runs the world. And that has been a journey because it requires a lot of effort. It requires a lot of engineering and practical concerns that need to be addressed. But overall, I would say that is the biggest trend that fascinates me. There's always new algorithms, there's always new capabilities and techniques, but AI acting in the real world in concert with physical systems, that's the big thing.
Yes, and thank you. And I'll just make a quick shout out for a conference that McCombs hosted a month or two back on the ethics of artificial intelligence. And we had a couple of thousand registrants, and this was hosted by our researchers who work in machine learning and artificial intelligence. And it was just a real pleasure to attend part of that conference. And our McCombs faculty work with faculty across campus with a new NSF AI Institute and Machine Learning Laboratory at UT. Amir, I think you were involved in getting that established. What do you hope that new institute achieves?
Well, Dean Mills, actually, Zabe, my wife, who went to school at the McCombs School of Business, and I was studying computer science, we actually met on campus. Both of us care deeply about the university, and we decided that this was one of the things that we wanted to be part of our legacy, and it was the greatest joy to be able to provide that inaugural grant and get this wonderful institution launched. And then, of course, the NSF came in, and it became a much bigger and much more credible institution with greater resources. My hope really is, in many ways, I'm an artificial intelligence both purist and romanticist. In that, while in the near term, yes, artificial intelligence has to be focused on solving real practical problems in the now, and we've got to take the technology we have and make hay with it, if you will. But in the grand scheme of things, I do hope that the research and work that comes out of this institute becomes more and more general, so that over time we lay the scaffolding, we create the infrastructure that enables us to leap towards that ultimate goal of artificial general intelligence. That to me has been the light towards which I've been running my whole life. And to the extent that this institution can contribute to that endeavor, which I believe would be the greatest endeavor man can embark upon, then that would be an association well made and a life well lived, as far as I'm concerned.
I share your passion, and I'm grateful that you and your wife gave it the venture capital to attract the NSF and get us started. Thank you. Keith, I want to turn to you with a question about cyber attacks and cybersecurity. We had in our government a major cybersecurity breach that affected half a dozen federal agencies and, of course, thousands of businesses. Can you talk a little bit about, in your role in economic forecasting, how you think about and worry about cyber attacks as a threat to our economy?
Yeah, I mean, in this time period of COVID, I think that breach went unnoticed by a lot of people, but they're happening more and more. And obviously, as the nation's central bank, we ourselves are very concerned and very invested in cybersecurity, as you might guess, given that we, set interest rates through the Federal Open Market Committee, and we have a lot of sensitive information, plus just our role with banks and everything else. Also, we do a lot of roundtables with banks. Obviously, we're a regulator of banks, and just over and over for the past, I don't know how many years, one of their main concerns is cybersecurity. You think of a small community bank, and they still exist throughout Texas. It's a lot of investment for them to hire a cybersecurity person. And they're actually, many look to the Fed to try to help them with this situation. But it's a growing concern. I mean, obviously the theft and the person, the robber today is not going to a bank with a gun. He's sitting at home on his computer, and it's just as dangerous to business activity, and needs to be treated that way, obviously. But One of so I tried to look up the classification of a cybersecurity company, and the best I could find was an industry classification called Computer System Design and Related Services. I think many of them are in there. And if you look at that industry in Texas, it's since 1990, it's grown at an average annual rate of 8.2%. So it's been growing very, very fast. And last year during COVID, while overall job growth declined 4.5% in Texas, this industry grew by 6.7% last year. So it slowed a little bit below trend, but 6.7% job growth last year is very strong. So the industry has been growing, and it's going to continue to grow. I might say that I'm stationed here in San Antonio, and because of our military presence, people don't think of San Antonio as a high-tech city, but they think of us as a military city, and that connection has fostered the growth of cybersecurity, as obviously military is a big customer of that industry. So places like San Antonio, Austin, obviously everywhere really, companies are growing in this industry, and this will continue to grow and place demands on skilled labor. So it's a growth industry. It's a very important industry. Unfortunately, these hackers are getting more and more sophisticated, and so this industry will continue to grow. I'm sure these companies face difficulty finding workers continuously, and thus put demands on universities such as UT Austin to continue to kind of train these types of students.
Yeah, and Keith, I'm just now getting to know the people over at the Clements Center for National Security at the University of Texas at Austin. And Amir, I'll go back and talk to them and see how well connected they are over into the AI and Machine Learning Institute. It could be they're already well connected, but I'll make sure they are. I want to open this up to any of you. We just have a brand new federal administration with the Biden administration. What are you seeing as major policy initiatives related to technology broadly, artificial intelligence, or cybersecurity? What are you seeing coming out or expecting to see?
Well, this is an area that's near and dear to my heart. I've been making the case that we need to be a lot more aggressive in pushing these types of technologies which are transformative. I think on the DoD side, we've for 5 years talked about acquisition being a problem. Smaller companies that have a tremendous innovation find it very difficult to break into the DoD ecosystem. And that's a problem that needs a lot of work, and enough has not been done. While at the same time, there are very large global investments being now made by peer competitors, both in their local venture ecosystems as well as in specific technologies. It's not clear to me that we'll be able to match each one of those dollar for dollar, but we should make use of the core strengths of this country, which are innovation from everywhere, open doors, welcoming scientists and researchers, and the University of Texas at Austin is such a great example of that. And I think over the last few years we lost quite a bit of that. So in a short answer, what I can say is more openness, more resources towards research, and greater encouragement for liaisons between universities and companies in a way that they're government supported. Those are at the very least areas that I think the new government really needs to focus on.
D. Mills, if I can jump on that, I think Amir offers a wonderful perspective on, sort of the deeply technical side of things. I'll just add that I think one of the things we witnessed arguably is a good thing out of the last administration was that full employment is hugely impactful. And I think really bottom line, focusing on full employment and sustaining the organizations that already exist. All of us in business always say it's more cost effective to keep a customer than to find a new one. I think the same can be said for businesses that were healthy businesses before the pandemic that just need, things like PPP loans and bridges to get them across this challenging time. So if we can keep unemployment up, we have all kinds of impacts downstream in terms of, the cost on health, right? The mental health crisis that we're experiencing during COVID times, and all of those things impact businesses. So since small business is such a big part of our economy, I think that's a really simple platform for the Biden administration to continue to push on. Just fixing the COVID problem, enabling people to act quickly and get resources, and then keeping unemployment high allows us to stimulate innovation and keep that flywheel in motion.
Okay. Keith, did you want to weigh in, or shall we?
I'll just say, following Mellie, that I think some famous person said the answer to most of our problems is the same today as it was 100 years ago. Will be the same in 100 years, and it's education. And so hopefully, I think every president since Carter has said that they're going to be the next education president. And it really is not as much about the average level of achievement, but the diversity of achievement and the diversity of quality across K through 12 in particular. And if we can narrow that spread, if we can really focus on low performing schools and put the resources into those schools and innovation into those schools to really kind of improve the schools that are struggling the most, that would go a long way to solve a lot of our problems. And aside from that, I would say that states have really learned during this rush of unemployment insurance claims that their technology is from, some from the 90s, some from the 80s, and they just couldn't handle it because they're using old hardware and software. And so to really, there's really a big demand across levels of government to improve their technology.
Yeah, thank you, Keith. Well, let's pivot a little bit to talk about more specifically innovation. And Amir, you've talked before about exponential technologies. So something that spurs an exponential type of growth. And you had said before, AI is not a narrow industry. It's a technology that applies everywhere. How does it interact with other types of technologies that could be described as exponential?
Dean Mills, one of the really interesting things about the near future is how many of these exponential curves across multiple areas are about to intersect. You rightly pointed out that artificial intelligence will play with not one, but many of these areas and will have a multiplicative impact, the super exponential effect. Right now, if you sort of look at the prices of solar cells, they've been on this logarithmic cost curve where there's been an exponential improvement in return per dollar invested. There are similar cost curves across batteries, and batteries are about to cross the threshold where even high-speed aviation can be supported with those types of batteries within a couple of years. There's the electrification of everything. So what I find very interesting is this nexus between artificial intelligence on the one hand and the improving competence of AI systems in sophisticated control and perception, of which one example would be a self-driving car. And I know we don't have a self-driving car that's level 5 that's totally safe for all the roads out there. But breaking that problem down into specific areas, it's still a technology that can be leveraged at scale in numerous places. Combining that type of intelligence with the broad electrification of the world really leads to some unbelievable, amazing outcomes. For example, there's this old joke, I got my, social networking websites, but where's my flying car, right? And now we have not one, but many flying cars. And now we have cars that drive on the road that are controlled by AI. Last thing I'll say is that this is an area so important to me and to the work that we do, that just outside Austin, we've now invested in a large facility where we'll be taking aerial terrestrial systems and integrating them with artificial intelligence. And actually that process has begun. So I would very much like to see Austin not only as an aviation hub, but really as the birthplace for these aerial terrestrial integrated intelligent systems. That I think has just unbelievable potential. Everything from a small cart that delivers a package to a drone that flies over, and flying cars, etc. It's a whole new brave world out there.
Well, and a couple of our professors were able to partner with General Motors to get some data around the advances in these self-driving cars. And part of what was impactful and interesting to me is that it was taking into account human failings. So it's when we're using the AI to match the human imperfections and recognize that those are going to exist, and what sort of fail-safes do we need because we're human, that I think we're really doing some great stuff. So
absolutely. And one quick thing that I'll add, we work with a company that builds the fastest car in the world, a company called Koenigsegg, European hypercar company. And some of the work that we're doing with them is all around essentially wrapping the human driver in an AI learning layer. So, when you're driving a high performance car like that, you've got to be very exact. You've got to really know and feel the car and all those things. But what if the car can know you? And what if there's an AI skin that surrounds you and can adapt to you and adjust how the car performs, so that what you like doing always equates to the car's peak performance? And I mean, that's just one example, but things will become much more intelligent because they'll be layered and cocooned and surrounded with AI of this type. So I completely agree with you.
Okay, well, Keith, let's keep the car analogy and look in the rear view mirror as we look a year from now back at the pandemic, because I'm an optimist. What sort of lasting impacts are we going to have on things like business travel and the industries built around it? And before you answer, I just need to say I can't wait to get on airplanes and do a reasonable amount of business travel again. So I am missing being on airplanes with my airplane friends.
Yeah, and certainly a lot of people out there are ready for that interaction face to face, but nonetheless, I don't know how many people are on this right now, but I know we had about 2,000 signed up, and I bet at least half a year ago today would not have heard of this Zoom that we're on today. And yet I would think most of us on the call today have used it and now understand it and use it in their social groups and church groups. And there's this thing called the learning curve, and we've advanced up that learning curve such that we're no longer afraid of this technology, and see its usefulness, see how conferences can get so much more participants than a hotel ballroom. So it fundamentally is changing and will have permanent, long-lasting impacts on a way people do business within their own company across different areas of the country and the world, and conferences and other things. So we did a survey in January of our business contacts, and we asked the question, are there structural changes your firm has made or plans to make as a result of COVID-19 that you expect to be permanent? And the biggest thing was telecommuting. Approximately 29% of our, I think it's 369 respondents, 29% says they're going to have a permanent increase in telecommuting. And I know in this morning's paper, there's a high-tech company in San Francisco called Salesforce. They own the largest office building there, and they just announced that they're going to allow their employees long-term telecommute. Some will be in the office 1 to 3 days. Some will not be in the office on a regular basis at all. And within that, actually within that story, it was interesting because some employment company that tracks moves said that there's been this movement of workers out of San Francisco, and the number one place for them to move is Austin. So it's changing. It's changing a lot of things. The second highest answer, 28%, said that they've increased the technology adoption throughout their business, and this is a permanent type thing. So obviously, increased use of technology it happens every year, and it's greater during recessions. But I think this is a bigger shift than normal. So in the long run, that means greater productivity growth. It means that we won't be spending as much time for those meetings we don't really necessarily need to fly to. And that means more output per worker. And in the long run, productivity increases or standard living. But in the short run, it causes issues with jobs. And one of the biggest industries impacted, of course, is hotels and convention centers and things like this, and all the restaurants and retail around those areas that are set up because of business travel. There was a survey of meeting planners done at the end of January and said that only 22% anticipating actually resuming face-to-face meetings in the first half of this year. So it's going to be a long process. Another 50% said by the end of this year, and 18% said they don't even expect resuming face-to-face meetings till next year. In terms of, so when they're asked when they expect to return to 2019 levels in terms of their meetings and conventions, only 7% expected the return to occur this year, and 32% by next year, and 71% by 2023. So this is expected to be a long haul for kind of return to pre-COVID levels for business travel. So that industry is going to suffer, and in particular luxury hotels, because leisure travel has actually saw some recovery in the second half of the year, but business travel is still way down. And it's going to return, but it's going to return slowly. So there are industries that are going to really suffer. And then there's these changes that we hear announced by hotels that the standard for hotels is going to be cleaning your room every 3 days instead of every day. And you think about that, that's a lot of jobs. It's very labor intensive. So if leisure and hospitality jobs aren't returning to pre-COVID in a very quick fashion as the economy bounces back in the second half. So where are they going to find jobs? And high tech is booming, but someone who's cleaning rooms or doing manual labor is not easily transformed into cybersecurity or high tech jobs. No. So once again, education is at the front and center of solving these types of issues, but there's going to be quite a bit of structural issues there.
Keith, thanks for pivoting us over to social impacts of the pandemic, and as we're seeing these industry shifts. Before we take a bunch of smaller audience questions that came in, Mellie, I want to turn to you about technology commercialization. So President Jay Hartzell and I and the deans, as you might expect in natural science and engineering and elsewhere on campus, would love to see more partnerships between inventions and discoveries on the campus by professors and out with venture capital in the real world. You're front and center with a little bit of that. What can you tell us about technology commercialization and the role of a university?
Well, as somebody who spent the first 2/3 of my career in the private sector, I have to say I underappreciated the role that a university plays in everything we're talking about. So much of technology begins in an academic environment, even in Amir's world. It's researchers that often create some of the science behind it, and it's the important public-private sector collaborations, which we often call sponsored research agreements, that help bring those out into the world. And I think we're in a really exciting time because there is a focus on enabling early stage companies, not just high tech, right? And that's facilitated through SBIR grants and non-dilutive forms of funding, which I referred to earlier. In the time of COVID, we've seen unprecedented policy changes like emergency use authorization, and it all marries at the intersection of kind of a real-time manufacturing that's been enabled. And so that drives kind of both a hardware and software opportunity. So I'm excited about that in terms of job creation. I don't know about you, I could listen to Amir and Keith for an entire evening and learn a lot about it. But in my little fiefdom, universities are playing an increasing role in creating these companies. And, over the 5 years I've been on campus now in commercialization activity, I'm seeing more collaboration. I'm seeing educational opportunities for our master's and doctoral students, many of whom won't go on to be tenured professors. They'll go on and work in industry. And so helping them learn the skills of entrepreneurship and giving them real world experiences is something that people are really leaning into now. We just launched the Texas Venture Labs Fellows Program so that we can engage even with our alumni folks in that sense and bring them opportunities to bring their expertise to the startup ecosystem in Texas. And so it's kind of a win-win there in terms of stimulating innovation and then letting larger business take it into the broader economy.
Thanks, Mellie. I'm going to have to land this plane by 12:45. So I am looking at the extra submitted questions and going to pick among the ones that I was interested in knowing the answer to. So does anybody want to talk about the future of cryptocurrency? And I was seeing we're getting very close to being able to buy cars with it. So in the news this week.
I want to hear what Amir says, but I will just say quickly, I am so excited about decentralized finance and the possibilities it creates for whole microeconomies to exist. It's fascinating, powerful, and fraught with all kinds of policy and regulatory challenges and whatnot. But, Amir, it came from your world. I would love to hear your perspective on it.
I'm a big believer, particularly in Bitcoin, not as a currency as much as a store of value, as a form of digital gold. I do think that if you look at sort of the inflation that's occurred in the last several years, it's been tremendous. And the M2 monetary supply expansion just last year was about 25%. 75% of all expansion has taken place in the last decade. There's another probably 15 to 18% coming this year. Simply not sustainable in my mind. This is just one person's opinion. And I've written about this topic as well. I think Bitcoin has crossed the threshold. There are large companies now, Michael Saylor's MicroStrategy, of course, most recently Elon Musk's Tesla, and before that, PayPal and Square. Institutional investors are piling in. So I think the fact that you have limited supply, the fact that you have instantaneous transfer, the fact that you have a very, very secure mechanism, and the fact that we collectively, a large enough number of people now believe in this as a store of value, I think we're over the threshold. In my own estimate, Bitcoin is going to be a real asset class, and it's being treated as such by large financial institutions. More broadly, blockchain, of course, is also a very intriguing, critical technology. As part of our aerial operating system, Dean Mills, that you were describing, the partnership with Boeing and SkyGrid, blockchain actually forms the basis of how we track each and every maintenance activity, each and every flight activity with a network of drones. So we use it deeply. But separate and apart from that, I am absolutely a believer in Bitcoin. It's crossed the threshold. It's a real thing, and it needs to be taken very seriously.
Keith, did you want to weigh in on that one, or I've got a bunch more? So,
I think Amir did a good job on that,
okay.
so we can move on.
So we probably have time for this last one. Are there any industries or companies that are hot right now that you think, oh, in 5, 10, 20 years, that won't be hot without crashing somebody's market today?
Well, I'll just say that I'm a big believer in trusting the process. There's a combination that happens, right? We've seen 50% of the S&P 500 turnover in the last decade. We're projected to see, I think it's 75% of the S&P in the next 20 years, depending on whose data you look at. So there's no doubt that market share is changing hands, and you have the incumbents trying to hold on to market share, and you have the newcomers trying to take it away. So there will be some changing of market share, some death of market share by just complete business model innovation and transformation. And then there'll be a bunch of companies that, like always happens, they evolve and they innovate as a core part of their business. So I don't predict doom and gloom for any one company. I predict the usual process, which is, acquisition, consolidation, right? The usual business processes that go into play will continue to persist, and we'll see a percentage of that that's completely new and disruptive.
100%. And if I can just quickly add, there's this innovation adoption index almost that you can kind of apply to companies. My belief is that this is becoming more and more important. Companies that don't want to adopt artificial intelligence because it makes them uncomfortable, as an example, or because it's too much to do, and how do you get over all these? I think those companies, they're not going to be around for too much longer. The inherent edge that technology now gives an early adopter is tremendous. And I think the luxury of being a laggard no longer exists. You can choose to be a laggard, and then the rest, I think, will be taken care of by the markets, because within a few years, unfortunately, you won't exist. So that's an index that I do look at. I do look at the technology adoption index to try and figure out if this company will be around.
Okay, last thoughts on anything, Keith? I'll give you the last word before I wrap up with my thanks to all three of you.
Sure. Let me just say it'll be one of the questions we didn't get to was about Austin, and Austin is centered quite well. It's going to bounce back. It had the best performance of the large metros in Texas, probably one of the best of all the metros. Obviously, it declined last year, but job growth was only down 3%. And so the other issues will pop up, such as housing costs will return. It's actually never left, but other things like, labor market tightness. And although it'll be interesting to watch how firms hire workers going out in terms of being in town or not in town. But Texas continues to be a good place. A lot of people we saw even in the middle of the pandemic moved to Texas last year. Continue to have low cost of living. But as we get more and more dense, we become more and more like California, and it becomes harder and harder to hold down cost of living. So that'll be the real challenge for Texas over the next 30 years, is to hold down the cost of living while population and job growth continue strong.
Okay, well, Mellie Price and Amir Hassan and Keith Phillips, I appreciate your educating me today and the 1,800 plus people that registered for today's event. I just couldn't be more proud to be in the state of Texas, in the city of Austin, Texas, at the University of Texas at Austin, where we are all about innovation and entrepreneurship, in part due to Mellie's leadership, and artificial intelligence. Amir, thank you for your transformational gift over in AI. And, stay tuned. President Jay Hartzell, it just has so much passion for technology commercialization. If you're one of the businesses listening today that want more access to smart researchers here at UT Austin, you can get in touch with me or Mellie Price, and we'll figure out who you need to talk to. And Keith, thank you for you and the Federal Reserve Board being such great partners in this year after year. And stay tuned, because we will continue to plan future events. And if you registered today, you're on our mailing list, and we'll let you know. So with all that, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.